Hi, and welcome to week 10. So I can't believe I'm saying week 10, but week 10. So this week is an interesting week because we have spring break. So happy spring break. So we will start this module, then pause, and then finish up after spring break. So let's look at how that's going to work out. So technically, this module isn't due until April 12th. So it's due 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks from today. I'm recording this video on a Sunday, full disclosure, but basically 13 days from when the module opens. So this module talks about specifically scaffolding language and literacy. We talked last week about scaffolding learning, and you learned about prompts and different strategies to support children's learning overall and what scaffolds are. Scaffolds are strategies, temporary instructional tools to support students' learning and basically to differentiate instruction. And we use scaffolds in particular situations based on a child's needs, and how to and what we can do to support their learning. We talked about how often people think Vygotsky developed scaffolding, but he really didn't. But many people think about using scaffolds in the zone of proximal development, and there's nothing wrong with thinking about it that way. You can definitely use scaffolds in the zone of proximal development, as long as we attribute scaffolding to those who created it as opposed to Vygotsky. Um, so we have readings on focusing on how to support young children's language and literacy, including multi-language learners. So we have several readings and videos in this week's module. So let's just look at those. The first is Stockall and Dennis, and they have 12 strategies. They talk about using them with infants and toddlers, but really, when you look at them, you'll see that they can be used with many children. So establishing a caring relationship, yes, that works with lots of children. Please don't indicate that as a strategy because that's basically a very basic one. Don't indicate that as a scaffold, I should say, because that's a pretty basic one, and that's one that we do all the time, the foundation of our work. Turn taking is a scaffold, information talk, responding to nonverbal communication, using rich and varied vocabulary and looking at that. Motherese or parentese is something we do with infants. Drawing a child's attention, having joint attention and social referencing, using meaningful talk to describe concepts. These so far, I think I've listed 7 scaffolds. Child-directed speech, asking questions and using wait time, listening with your eyes, and using social routines. Those are strategies from Stockall and Dennis. And then we have communication skills for toddlers that are enhanced with um, the facilitation of speech language pathologists. So it talks about partnering. It talks about modeling and reinforcement. Okay. It talks about extension. And I might be missing a few. Expansion. Okay, these are techniques. These are scaffolds that are important. Okay, and there might be some more in here that we're going to talk about self-talk and parallel talk a little bit later also. Um, but there's some strategies in here. And so here's a Google article. This article talks about children who are diagnosed or at risk for autism spectrum disorder. However, it has lots of strategies to use with all children, including focusing and following a child's lead, which is joint attention, social referencing, modeling, elaborations, or expansions. Some of them are repeated between articles, um, interspersing preferred or non-preferred activities to promote requests, choice making, contingent imitation, and balanced turns. These are all scaffolds, right? Naturally reinforcing language, wait time, or time delay. Here's parallel talk, and here's self-talk, which we just mentioned. Obstruction, sabotage, violating routines, insight out of reach, and purposeful communication. And then there's, if you read through the article, there we go. It explains all of these in more detail so that you can have a clear understanding of what these strategies are. It's a very powerful article to use with all children. And there's translanguaging, which is an important tool for children who are um, multi-language learners. And so talking about what translanguaging is, how to use it with young children. And so um, I would suggest that you read through this article. It talks about strategies to use holistically if you have children who are multi-language learners in your class. And here are some practices that you might use, as well as the overall article itself is really full of strategies embedded. They're not highlighted as the other articles have them. However, it's full of rich practices. This is a second strategy, and it tells you how to engage in that strategy. Um, Powerful stuff. This is a video on supporting oral language development in a language-rich environment. Um, Again, lots of information that would help. Supporting multilingual students in the early grades. So strategies to support students who speak multiple languages, okay, and what you can do in classrooms. 5 ways, and here we go. 5 ways to support dual language learning in early childhood programs. So these are again 5 scaffolds. Okay, these are all different scaffolds. I've lost count of how many scaffolds we have now. We just went over this one, and we have this one here twice. And there's our baby. And then 12 ways classroom teachers can support emerging language learners, and these are children who are typically learning multiple languages. So these are suggestions interspersed with videos, and again, very strong suggestions. So you probably have 70 or 80 scaffolds here. Maybe not that many, but a good number. Each of these are scaffolds. Some of them look like they're labeled specifically for um, uh, multilingual learners or infants and toddlers. However, I would suggest that many of them can be used with or children with autism. I would suggest that many of the strategies can be used with diverse students. And don't look at the labels, look at the scaffolds, and see what the scaffolds hold. Let me go back to our page so we can see what we're doing this week. Okay, so after you're finished reviewing the materials, there's always the note-taking form. Then there's the observation summary paper 2. So you've created observation summary 1, you're finishing that, and now you're doing observation summary 2 for your focus child. It's a observation, same child, just part 2 from your field work. And then you're doing participation task for week 10. You're reflecting on language and literacy from your schooling. When did a teacher use this scaffold to support your language and literacy? Tell us what the scaffold is, explain the context, and describe how the teacher used the language and literacy scaffold with you. Of course, cite the source. Then there's scenarios for language and literacy scaffolding. Identify a scenario and answer the questions in the document. Think about your 410 fieldwork experience. Describe a time when a teacher from your fieldwork experience has used a language and literacy scaffold from this module to support a child's language and literacy learning. Identify the scaffold, describe the setting and the class and the context. Describe how the teacher used the scaffold and cite the source. And then question 4, think about your focus child for EC 410. In detail, describe a scaffold for language and learning, for literacy and language from this module you believe will support your focus child's language and literacy learning. Identify the scaffold for language and literacy. Describe the scaffold for language and literacy in your own words. Explain how you would use the scaffold, the specific language and literacy scaffold with your focus child, and why you believe the specific scaffold would support your child's language and literacy learning. Again, cite the source. And when you reply to a colleague, you're going to identify a colleague who selected a different scaffold for language and literacy in response to question 4. So for their focus child, not sure what happened there. And then in your response, explain how you could use that same scaffold that your colleague identified for your focus child. Why you believe the scaffold would support your child's language and literacy learning. So that is what you're doing for this week's module. I hope everyone has a great spring break. If you celebrate the holidays, I hope you have a great holiday. But most importantly, I hope you have time to rest and restore yourself during the break. Be well. Have a good rest of the day.